Welcome to the Backyard Professor Responds videos. Happy Father's Day, everybody. Beautiful morning, nice and sunny. Thought I'd come out into my backyard and share some ideas on a new theory by Grant Cameron. Yeah, he's the guy that talks so fast you can't understand him. I get it, but he's genius. This is out of Alan Steinfeld's Making Contact. He calls it his theory of wow. And he shares a lot of weird anomalies, like why on earth do UFOs have headlights on them? I mean, they fly across interstellar space and they need lights to do that. Cameron's theory addresses that and some other really interesting anomalies that I'd like to share with you. I'll just kind of regurgitate the first part because the government, it's interesting that we are getting mixed messages, mixed signals from the government, the various different agencies, the DOJ, the CIA, the DOD, etc. And we get that because they want to control the narrative. So it makes sense that they're going to put out contradictory information. But it's really interesting. Cameron has come up with this theory of wow, that the aliens are also giving us this slow disclosure because they too want to control the narrative. And that actually makes good sense. They want to manage the story, and he talks about that. The doublespeak from the government does just that. What it does is it causes enough confusion that we're not quite sure what's real, what's not. We don't know which story to believe, etc. That way they can try to make themselves out to be the good guys and so on and so forth. They leak information and then they deny it. And they do this over and over and over again so that it is a gradual, slow leaking disclosure. It's not going to be catastrophic. They start feeding you to make sure you go in the direction that they want you to go. They start telling you just enough information, especially the movie makers, so that they can control that. And so the question is this: the Tic Tacs, the videos in 2017 that were finally released that happened in 2004, they were just playing with those jets. But what it did is it was enough of a wow factor that it caught their attention. And now that we have seen them, we also are given the wow factor. And the pilots go wow, and when they go wow, the ET's mission is accomplished. Oh, okay, you noticed us, good. And then they move on. The theory is that all they're trying to do is trying to get us to say wow, is to realize that we're not alone. That's the idea. And the New York Times article actually picked that up. They said, wow, what is that? So they definitely got the wow factor going. The ETs did, with the way that they showed up to the pilots and the maneuvers that they did. Makes sense. The whole UFO phenomenon may be just a plan to raise our consciousness. And he says, let me explain this. Conceivably, this all could just come down to being a science fair project on Alpha Centauri or Zeta Reticuli. You can imagine a teacher standing up in front of the class and saying, okay, now we've got this planet Earth, right? And we want to get their attention. So the teacher asks the class, what would you do to do that, to get their attention? So the kids in grade 1 would say, well, let's put light on the craft. It seems like a joke, but it's not a joke, because why would UFOs need lights, right? You know why. So that you can see them. Do you think we kept lights on the helicopters when they went into Pakistan to get bin Laden? When you start looking at UFO reports, you're going to see a wide display of different lighting formations, and almost every one of them is different. The lights aren't for them, they're for us. They want us to go, wow, and then tell our friends about what we saw. That's kind of an interesting take. But Cameron develops this in a most interesting way here. Prime example is when John Lennon saw his UFO, and he described the UFO, and then he went and told everybody, and the popularity has gotten out because of his popularity, and the UFOs knew that he was going to be a very influential person. So they showed up to him in a weird, wild way, in a weird, wild craft. That's the idea. He says the same thing happened to me when I saw my UFO lights in 1975. The observation threw me down the rabbit hole of which I've never come out of. And then, of course, the different excursions of the UFOs at the nuclear military bases, hovering there and turning on their lights to absolutely magnificent bright, and it freaked everybody out at those nuclear plants. But it got the word out. Everybody was going, wow, at that point. And it spooked a lot of people. That was the intent, of course, to get your attention on it. The indirect message makes us think. So my experience happened the same year that Travis Walton was abducted for 5 days. Why would they take him for 5 days? It's a good question. Were the alien abduction medical teams on strike? No. They kept him for 5 days because they knew that that would get attention and it would be a big wow. And even to this day, Travis Walton's story is one of the best known, and he's still talking about it, right? So it's gotten the word out. It's gotten people's attention. Now, the interesting thing is the messages are also an ever-evolving situation. Back in the 1950s, the 60s, and 70s, the UFOs used to be accompanied by what we call angel hair. We no longer see that, but it was such a weird anomaly that it got people to talk about it. This angel hair, this real fine, wispy, misty stuff. Spider webs almost. They would slowly float down and hang on the trees and get on the ground. People would pick it up and it would sort of melt away. It could never be analyzed because it would dissolve too quickly. If this was part of the UFO propulsion system, it would still be going on, but it isn't. Because angel hair was just part of an evolving circus act to get everyone to pay attention, to go, wow, and then tell others. In UFO history, we see this pattern of making contact shifting as well. And this is something I've noticed, and I've said so in some of my videos. People think that what is happening now happened then. That's not true. We see the ability to attract attention with weird actions, as in the story of Bud Hopkins, the well-known alien abduction researcher. You might think that he had a rational idea, and one day that he thought, oh, I think I want to study alien abductions. No, that's not what happened to Bud Hopkins. So he ended up with a very interesting story. I had this weird experience yesterday. I'm driving along, and there's this flying saucer off in the field. Now, this is a friend of his who told Bud Hopkins his experience. He said, I'm driving along, and there's this flying saucer off in the field. About 100 yards from the road, there were these alien beings standing outside of the craft, and they were digging holes. And Bud says, really? The next day, he drives to that location, and sure enough, there are 15 holes, 5 inches deep, dug into the field. He stops at a nearby apartment complex and asks the night watchman if he saw anything going on in the field the other night. And he said, yeah, man, there were a lot of really strange lights. And bam, he sucked down the rabbit hole. He writes one of the most famous UFO books there ever was, Missing Time. Then when was the last time you heard about aliens crossing the galaxy and then standing around a craft with shovels digging holes? The story is patently absurd, and we all know it. However, the whole thing was a setup. The purpose was to get Bud Hopkins to go, wow. And then he told the story, and it's a multi-million best-selling copy of a book that millions have read. And they, too, became more cognizant of this interesting phenomenon. That was the point. It got involved and helps tell the story. So another story involves another guy who got wowed. He ended up with MUFON. He was the Navy pilot. His wife was on the rooftop. His wife goes down to get him a glass of wine, and bam, he sees this formation of lights. The ETs didn't want his wife to see him for whatever reason. It's their agenda, but he saw them clearly. He thought at first they were geese, but then it turns out that they weren't. He watched them do a strange maneuver, and then they fly off, not like geese do at all. Now, the question is, did they have to make that movement? Did they have to come in a V formation? I asked him directly, do you think this was a random event that you just happened to be there? And he said, no, I don't. It was planned. This whole thing was a plan. They let him have the sighting, and he was dragged down the rabbit hole. Now he is totally into this stuff. He's running the biggest UFO meeting group in all of California. So this new analysis of this new type of pattern that Cameron is noticing is quite interesting, because on the one take, the stories are so ridiculously stupid that you automatically say no. I mean, aliens flying from Zeta Reticuli for decades to get here so that they can grab a bunch of shovels and dig holes in the earth. Oh, and don't forget that they had their headlights on. Yeah, come on. It's obvious someone's smoking too much of that wildwood weed, right? But on Cameron's analysis, the pattern makes perfect sense. It's getting people to say, wow, and those people end up informing multiple millions of other people with actual events such as missing time that is a very real situation with tens of thousands of people. And it's beginning to be noticed. Now, why are they so interested in getting us to notice them? He brings that up here in a few minutes. Oh, and then there's the school kids, the 62 grade school kids who saw the UFO. The gray little beings. One of the girls was from Hamilton, California, or Canada, I mean, sorry. Her parents were missionaries for the Salvation Army. She went into the schoolyard, to the edge of the schoolyard. They were bouncing up and down on these logs and fallen trees. And she sees in the flash of the corner of her eye a gray type alien being hovering above the ground. But he's not stationary. He's imitating them bouncing on the log. Then she looks toward the alien, and boom, it's right in front of her face. She and the others are frozen while she experiences what is called rapid image cycling. The being projected images into several of the school kids' minds. Some of them were about the environment, some of them were about other things, etc. The being got the attention of the girls. They talked about the technology. They talked about the problems of the future if we don't do things right. But then there are we destroy the trees, etc. But then there are other situations at schoolyards that happen in Ireland, in Russia, in Australia, etc., involving 300 children in Australia. The question is, why does the intelligence land at a schoolyard? It's a good question. Most of these kids were between 6 and 13 years old. Many of them talked about receiving telepathic images coming into their heads. The question is, are these kids telling us the truth? If they are, look at the messages that the aliens are trying to get across to us and the next generation. Additionally, there is this idea that all the UFO crafts have been the same since the first sightings. But this is a fallacy, and I've noticed this in my videos also. I've noted this. I've talked about this a little bit. The earliest sightings of 1896 and 1897 were huge wooden ships with their propellers on them. These were not one or two sightings. There were thousands of them. Most of them were on the West Coast back then. And then we have the Foo Fighters, the strange balls of light flying alongside the wings of both the Germans and the Americans' planes during World War II. So there was a huge change from these wooden ships that had occurred 60, 70 years earlier. Then after the war, we saw a phenomenon known as ghost rockets around 1946, occurring only around Sweden. But if this is a random phenomenon, why would it not appear in other countries? Because the pattern is that they are doing different things at different time periods in different places. The next shift came in the 1950s, where the pattern changed again with George Adamski. From 1947 to 52, there were lots of sightings, but nobody talked about the aliens. Then in 1952, Adamski appeared on the scene a week after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb. He goes public with the statement that the ETs have given him a message for the world: stop using nuclear weapons. In 1961, the whole UFO story changes yet again. From friendly, beautiful humans, we now begin to see ugly, small, gray beings. We have the beginning of the abduction scenarios with the Betty and Barney Hill case. The beings they encounter are wearing hats. Now, why would any alien from Zeta Reticuli wear a hat? You know, you have to ask that question. Does that make this story just a bunch of bonker bunk? The Hills see a classical UFO craft with windows around the sides, something that is very rarely reported about UFOs anymore. Like changing the pages of a book, their designs keep updating. Then on March 13th, 1997, there was a remarkable sighting of the Phoenix Lights. People all over the city saw a huge craft with lights on the edges estimated to be about a mile across. It floated a couple of 100 feet off the ground right over the city like it was heading to get a case of beer. 10,000 people saw it, and everyone said, "Wow, look at the size of that thing." And there are people alive who still talk about that, who have experienced it. I've had some in my comments on some of my former videos saying they have seen the Phoenix Lights. But did the craft really need to be a mile across? No, not at all. But it all starts to make sense if you realize that maybe they're just trying to get our attention. And then we ask, what about the crop circles? Again, they've just recently been on the news again. They're happening again, crop circles. There's been some new ones made. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, why would ETs make a crop circle? And why are they all completely different from each other? Do aliens need to make symbols in the wheat fields of England? You know, when you ask it that way, you go, yeah, you know, this is really kind of on the side of the ridiculous. But hold on, let's look at the pattern. If they wanted to say they are here, they would just land and tell us what's going on, don't you think? But if they want you to think deeper, then this is something else. The whole crop circle phenomenon began in the 1980s, and they were just simple round circles at first. Now there are about 4,000 of them from the 1980s, 90s, and into the 2000s, and some of them are very, very elaborate designs, exquisite geometric circles. Some of them are mathematics formulas, interestingly enough. Mayan designs are all laid out in the fields of wheat, barley, and sometimes corn as well. So when people see these on the ground or from aerial views, everyone goes, wow, how'd they do that? No one can explain the legitimate crop circles or how these intricate overlaying patterns were made. In some instances, the growing crops have been woven together. The circle called the Triple Julia set had over 400 concentric circles that appeared overnight in a rainstorm. It was a progressive operation into the 2000s, which got more and more and more sophisticated each year, creating more wow moments. So Colin Andrews, who is a good friend of Grant Cameron, he's the one that coined the term crop circle. And he said, my old life was completely changed over. It changed as soon as I saw my first crop circle. So that's how Colin Andrews got involved with it. And what's really interesting for Colin is this story. Where he was working in the communication business, and he had just bought one of those reel-to-reel tape recorders way back in the 1960s or 77. It was sitting on the floor in his living room, and he wanted to test it. So he plugs in a microphone, and the TV is going in the background. But as soon as he turns the tape recorder on, the TV goes blank, and on comes a message with a very alien-sounding voice. Because he had just turned on the tape recorder at the same time, he was able to record the whole message. I think 2 million people in Britain heard this. This strange voice talked for about 5 minutes. The message basically says, we come to warn you of the destiny of your race and of your world so that you may communicate it to your fellow beings, the course that you must take to avoid disasters which threaten your world and the beings on our world and the being on our worlds around you. This is in order that you may share in the great awakening as the planet passes through the new age of Aquarius. The new age can be a time of great peace and evolution for your race, but only if your rulers are made aware of the evil forces that can overshadow their judgment. Now that's basically what the voice said that Colin Andrew recorded on his recorder. It goes on like that for about 5 minutes. So did Colin just happen to turn on his tape recorder as the message came on the TV? Was it just a coincidence? Or was it another wow moment for his benefit and for the work he would do with the crop circles later? That's interesting, isn't it? ITN, the Independent Television News, the UK-based television production company was broadcasting, was flooded with calls asking what's going on. People were asking, what happened to my TV? What was that alien message? You see how it got people involved. It raised their awareness, is what happened. Well, they did 2 investigations into what and how something like this could happen. Then British government did a couple of investigations. The only thing they determined was that 2 TV towers sent a signal out toward Wiltshire County, the exact location where the whole crop circle craze would soon begin, interestingly enough. And speaking of crop circle formations, some experiencers report that they wake up with marks on their bodies. Some of them are like burn marks or cuts. Many of them are triangles. So here's a question. Does an advanced intergalactic race need to put triangles on people's bodies? Right? The more logical explanation would be that the experiencer goes, wow, how did that mark or cut get on my body while I was asleep in bed? I say the reason you have this mark is because you could wake up from an abduction type dream and say, well, it was just a dream. It didn't really happen. But when you look at your arm and you see this marking, it makes you go, oh, it wasn't a dream. I don't think these markings necessarily have any meaning, except that they are signaling you to know, yes, this is for real. It's not a dream. If you didn't have the marks, people would say you just imagined it or just dreamed it. But the contact experience, as the physical marks show, actually is evidence to prove that it was real. I mean, it's a very interesting idea, right? Another wow factor is the cattle mutilations. Bloodless. Many of them were bloodless. It's not just another dead cow. It is that something absolutely extraordinary has happened. And yeah, it's freaky. It freaks us out. But it's also, that's the wow factor of it. This is not a normal way that cows die. But some cows have had all their blood sucked out of them. Some cows have their hearts go missing with the sac that the heart is in completely intact. And that makes you wonder, good gosh, how did that happen? You see, it's a wow factor. And besides the fact the ETs might need the cow's blood because it's rich in copper. That's based on a recent study I just read. It's very interesting how that works. Without the wow factor, the cow just died. So what? Millions of cows die every day for us to have our hamburgers, and we don't give it a second thought. But a bloodless death like that, where did all the blood go? That's different. It gets our attention. So here's the one story I love the best, he says. A UFO lands, an alien comes out of the ship, and he asks a witness to get him a pail of water. I mean, seriously, this craft comes from across the galaxy and needs a pail of water. Yeah, right. Well, the guy goes off and gets a pail of water and gives it to the alien, and the UFO flies off. You know, what's the point of that? The point is that it was something to raise awareness, to take notice, to think about it, to spread the message that we are not alone. And what better way than through, on the one hand, a rather mundane task, and on the other hand, something so ridiculously bizarre, a pail of water from the ET, that you can't help but notice it and think, wow. Interesting theory, isn't it? So he says, I feel that eventually the consciousness will raise enough and there will be an awareness and openness to their presence. He thinks that's what the ETs are doing with us, because we can't handle the shock. It will be like when gay people got the right to be recognized as equal human beings, or when Black Americans got equal rights. Consciousness will reach a tipping point where the subject is in common discussions. At that point, everyone will say, well, yeah, of course there are aliens. I knew it all the time. Right? Another major component of the phenomenon is the misunderstanding that seeing a UFO is a random event. It may very well not be. There might be a planned projection There might be a plan in place for certain people to see UFOs at some times, and then other people to see and or hear about them or experience them at other times, etc. But there is something going on that is intentional and planned. And he goes on, the fallacy is that we believe that there are external events that happen to us. We believe sightings and encounters are separate events. This is not a one-off. We don't realize that we are connected to them. We may be the ones manifesting them. On another level, we may have agreed to be part of whatever this is. Once we have an experience, the phenomenon follows us around like a hitchhiker. Let me make it clear, there are no random events. It seems that almost 90% of the experiencers have paranormal phenomenon as well. All of these are wow events. If this was random, then why are these contactees experiencing things in their homes? Are they connected to a grander occurrence? They live in a world of wow. When I got into the game after having my first sighting in 1975, it was thought that if you saw one UFO in your lifetime, that was fine. But if you saw two, you were considered crazy. Back then, I would have thought you were crazy. Everybody thought that when you saw a UFO, it was a totally arbitrary thing. You just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or you may consider it the wrong place at the wrong time. So now we know, in fact, some people are called lifers. It's been going on from before they were in this life in the first place. And they've said so. Very interesting. So it's all about consciousness. And this is an incredible sort of expanding of how we're going to try to understand. Absolutely, we must. I mean, it's a great idea. It's a good way to try to get the nuts and the bolts of this under our belt without question. We need to know the science, the physics, the philosophy, etc. However, it's all about consciousness as well in order to understand this interesting phenomenon. When I started giving lectures on consciousness, the whole UFO community disowned me, like I had lost my marbles. They felt that I should just stick to what I know, like the US presidents and FOIA documents. I said, no. If you want to know what is going on with this phenomenon, don't you think you should study people who have had the experiences? For instance, many contactees say that at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. Now, that's just bizarre. I would have difficulty accepting that, to be quite blunt. No, I don't believe it. However, how do you know about the far side of the universe would be a question Cameron would ask. I had a download experience, so I know. Now, I personally have read a couple of different things about this download experience. Now, I have not had that experience, but in my ignorance, to then turn around and say, well, if I haven't, then of course you're lying because you haven't. But that assumes that my life experience is the objective one that only is allowed in everyone else, and no one else is allowed to experience anything that I don't, which is absolutely asinine kind of thinking. And yet we see that happening all the time. That's why others who have not had the experience call everybody who has the experience kooks, idiots, and funny weed smokers and drunks and brazen idiots. But that's just their ignorance, not the experiencers, right? So you get these people with the greatly expanded awareness indicating that the phenomenon has taught them to shut down the left brain, rational ego mind, and give them the ability to access whatever information they want. It's all available. It is not that we have to learn anything. It's just a matter of developing the ability to connect to the higher self. And most astonishing, this is remarkable because it's such an ancient text. The book of Enoch, the various books of Enoch, but especially Third Enoch, the latest copy, the Hebrew book of Enoch, talks about just this experience of being able to connect with the higher self. And that was written 400 AD. The earliest book of Enoch, the Ethiopian book of Enoch, dates to 200 or so BC. And it talks about this experience. Very remarkably interesting. So in abductions, people tend to black out. Most don't realize they've been taken by the aliens. Usually later in life, something happens to wake them up. Suddenly they realize they've been having this experience for their whole life. At first, it's very frightening, but in many hypnotic regressions, it goes back to the contact experience. They have a very special reason for being on Earth. So the first question I ask every experiencer is this: do you believe you have a mission? They will either say, yeah, I know what it is, or they will say, I think so. I don't know what it is, but somehow I think I've got a mission. It is as if they feel they've been chosen for something. They're involved with the phenomenon because, as others in this very collection of essays show, in some of the later essays, we are them and they are us. And I get it. That's a difficult one that's difficult to grasp. I'm just not going to hide that from you. That's one I'm still thinking on, right? So to sum it up, this is not a random world. People chose to be a UFO experiencer. People chose to have a near-death experience to learn something. People chose to have their OBEs in order to expand their consciousness and learn something greater about ourselves than we have and know in only our mere limited three-dimensional world, which is nothing like an overall total reality at all. This is just one sliver of what is really real and true. It may not just be one life. There may be a reincarnating of life after life after life in order to advance our knowledge, in order to advance the goodness that we as a species are destined to go into in the age of Aquarius, is his suggestion. We may be involved with these ETs through many, many, many lifetimes, is what he is suggesting. And even that's a wild shot, you know. How do you absorb that? How do you comprehend that? You know, I'm not going to lie to you. Say, oh, well, yeah, that's obvious. It is not obvious. Not, at least not to me. And maybe that's because I'm just kind of a spiritual woolhead. I have no idea. But some of this stuff is just not easy to digest. It takes some sincere effort. I'm not going to lie about it. Now, I'm willing to look into it, of course. I'm willing to look into all sides. I've said that time and again, because I'm well aware that my own life experience is so cotton-picking limited compared to so many others. There's so much that I just simply can't do for the simple reason that I just can't live long enough. You cannot read every book that is in the Library of Congress, which means the great reality is our ignorance, not our knowledge, of all the books out there written by billions of different people, most of whom are more intelligent than you are. You're never even going to see those books, let alone comprehend and understand them. That means you're 99% full of ignorance, not smarts. Well, that's pretty sobering. You know, you got to kind of be a little humble here because of that one obvious fact when you open your eyes to it. So this is what it's all about. This idea that when you realize that UFOs are not just random, you will understand that this is not a nuts and bolts phenomenon either. That is the number one lesson I want to relay. If you think the UFO phenomenon is just about hardware, you're never going to understand it. You need to know consciousness is the answer to the whole thing. Consciousness is the ground of being that changes all the rules about reality. Max Planck, the Nobel laureate and the originator of quantum theory, spelled out the new reality like this. Here's what he said. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. Everything changes, and this is what they're teaching us, the ETs. If the intelligence and the intelligences out there wanted to know what was going on, they would come out and tell us. But they're not doing that. They are giving us an indirect approach because they want us to think. And I know humans have almost become allergic to thinking. God forbid that we have to actually use our brains. Yeah, it's the best thing God ever gave us, but use them? Oh, hell no, man. I don't want to do that much work. See, we've been drugged. We've been dumbed down by our own culture. Yeah. That makes me angry. I don't know about you, but that does make me angry. So they want us to reach a level of higher consciousness on our own. That way it's greatly appreciated. They're not going to unscrew the top of your head and pour the knowledge and experience in. Sorry, you don't get to have it that easy. If that makes you mad, go back to watching your TV and stay asleep. As for the rest of us, we're going to go figure this out because it's a lot of fun to do. And I'm very glad that Grant Cameron, in this book by Alan Steinfeld, Making Contact, told us about this wow factor. It's really cool to think about. Yeah, it's difficult too. There's parts of it that I kind of balk at and go, I don't know, but that's all part of the learning process. The cool thing is, now that I can honestly say without question, is it has my attention without question. So I'll catch up to you just as soon as I can. Happy Father's Day to everybody. Hope you have a fabulous day.